can hate Vince McMahon. You can love him. You can never want to hear his name again. But here's the problem. If you've ever popped for a surprise return, or gotten chills from a WrestleMania moment, or been addicted to a storyline so hard you had to watch Raw the next week, you felt Vince's fingerprints. Because Vince didn't just run a wrestling company. He built a weekly TV universe, a machine, a format. And whether WWE is at its best or its worst, it's still operating on a blueprint Vince created decades ago. Now, before we go any further, this is not a worship piece. And it's not a hit piece. This is about his creative genius. The ideas he changed forever, the tricks he invented, the choices that made WWE feel bigger than wrestling. And the twist is, the most genius thing Vince ever did wasn't WrestleMania. It was something way more dangerous. Before Vince, wrestling was mostly regional, even with a few national-ish exceptions. Territories, local TV, local stars. You were a legend in one area and basically a nobody anywhere else. It was fragmented, it was scattered, and the ceiling was real. And that's the first thing Vince saw that other people didn't. He didn't see wrestling as a sport, he saw wrestling as television, episodes, recurring characters, cliffhangers, rivalries that play like seasons, villains you love to hate, heroes who feel like they belong to the crowd, not the company, catchphrases, music, rituals, the stuff that makes people build a habit. Because once you view wrestling like television, you stop thinking, how do we put on great matches? You start thinking, how do we make people feel like they can't miss next week? That's the entire game. And you can see that thinking in the earliest stars Vince pushed. Hulk Hogan didn't feel like a wrestler. He felt like a Saturday morning superhero that somehow walked into a real arena. Macho Man wasn't just talented, he was a character you could recognize in 1 second. Ultimate Warrior wasn't realism, he was a human special effect. Even the way Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels were framed wasn't just about who could wrestle better. Vince made them feel like opposite archetypes. Bret was the technician, the pride, the standard. Shawn was the showman, the chaos, the spotlight. Vince understood characters first, because characters create moments. Moments create memories. Memories create loyalty. And once Vince had that, his first major move was basically a statement to the world. Not selling wrestling, but selling an event. That's WrestleMania. He positioned it like the Super Bowl of this weird new universe he was building. Big venue energy, big mainstream attention, celebrity involvement. The kind of thing that makes even non-fans stop and go, wait, what is this? And once that worked, it didn't just make money, it changed the ceiling. Suddenly wrestling wasn't limited to a town or a territory or a late night slot. It could be culture. And here's the thing people miss. Vince wasn't just good at building stars. He was good at making stars feel mythic. Hogan slamming Andre wasn't just a move, it became a myth. Not because the match was a technical masterpiece, but because Vince framed it like a moment you were supposed to tell your kids about. It felt impossible. It felt larger than life. It became a clip that lived forever. And that's Vince in a nutshell. He understood that wrestling isn't just about what happens, it's about what the moment feels like. You see it with Bret's aura as champion. Vince made Bret feel like the belt meant something again, like the title was a standard. And you see it with Shawn, where Vince basically lets him be a walking highlight reel, because he understood that spectacle has its own value. But here's what Vince did next that's even smarter. One big event doesn't build a habit, a calendar does. So Vince didn't just create WrestleMania, he built a world where there was always something around the corner. Another pay-per-view, another hook, another reason to watch. That's when WWE starts feeling like a year-round television universe, instead of a random wrestling show you catch sometimes. And this is where Vince's genius becomes obvious. He didn't just create events, he created yearly rituals. The Royal Rumble isn't just a match, it's a yearly storyline generator. It gives you surprise, it gives you mystery, it gives you a clear prize, it gives you debate. It creates an instant road to WrestleMania. That's not wrestling logic. That's television addiction logic. And the Undertaker streak is the same thing. The streak didn't become legendary just because it existed. It became legendary because it turned into a ritual. Every year, the question wasn't who's wrestling Undertaker. The question was, is this the year? That's weekly TV thinking applied to an annual event. Vince turned a statistic into a myth. And once you understand that, you start seeing Vince's rhythm everywhere. He didn't want you satisfied, he wanted you hooked. Like even when you got a payoff, you immediately had another question. Okay, Austin won. What does Vince do next week? Then The Rock beat him. Who challenges next? Kane debuted. What is he really? Or Brock destroyed someone. Who survives him? Vince didn't just book matches, he booked next episodes. Now, this is where the next layer of his genius kicks in, because it wasn't enough to have events and rituals. Vince understood presentation is power. He understood that the fastest way to make a wrestler feel important is to control the way they enter the world. So entrances got bigger, music became identity, catchphrases became hooks, lighting became atmosphere, camera work became a language, and the audience learned something without realizing it. When WWE wants something to feel important, they know how to make it feel important. Think about The Undertaker. His entrance isn't an entrance, it's an event. The lights drop, the music hits, the pacing slows, and the entire arena changes temperature. It forces you to feel something. That is presentation doing storytelling. Think about Kane. Vince turned Kane into a horror movie. The slow walk, the fire, the mask, the idea that he wasn't just a wrestler, he was a threat. Think about Brock Lesnar's early run. Brock wasn't introduced like a normal rookie. He was introduced like a natural disaster. The way he moved, the way he threw people, the way commentary framed him, it wasn't, wow, this guy is good. It was, this guy is dangerous. Think about Stone Cold's glass shatter. That sound is basically an alarm. It tells the crowd something is about to go wrong. Think about The Rock. The Rock's entrance and mannerisms were so clear that he didn't even need to wrestle to control a building. He raises an eyebrow, and the crowd reacts like a punchline just landed. Vince made stars feel bigger because he made their presentation feel inevitable. But Vince's biggest creative weapon wasn't fireworks, or pyro, or stadiums. It was a concept, the final boss, because every great story needs something the hero can't just punch once and solve. Vince figured out the perfect final boss for wrestling, the boss himself. The day Vince becomes Mr. McMahon, WWE unlocked a cheat code. Now the enemy isn't just another wrestler, the enemy is the system, the suit, the authority, the person who can stack the deck, change the rules, ruin your life, and still walk out smiling. And the reason that's genius is simple, it feels real. Even if you know it's scripted, everybody understands that conflict. Worker versus boss, rebel versus machine, the guy with power versus the guy who refuses to be controlled. That's why Austin becomes the perfect hero for it. Austin wasn't presented like a superhero. He was presented like your anger with a heartbeat. And this is where people misunderstand Vince's genius. It wasn't just he came up with a good character, it's that he created an emotional engine that could run forever. Every week, the formula was simple. Vince tries to control the chaos. Austin is the chaos. The crowd wants chaos to win. Vince tries to embarrass him. Austin humiliates him. Vince rigs the game. Austin flips the table. Vince uses corporate power. Austin uses violence and attitude. You weren't watching to see who wins a match. You were watching to see what the boss will do next, and whether Austin will snap again. And once Vince understood that engine, he reused it in different skins for decades. Daniel Bryan versus The Authority is the same engine. The system is telling you who the star is. The crowd refuses. Bryan becomes a symbol, not just a wrestler, a symbol of the fans pushing back. CM Punk versus the company is the same thing. That whole vibe of, I'm the guy you don't want, but I'm the guy they want, that's the rebel versus the system engine. Even when it's not the exact storyline, Vince kept returning to the same emotional core because it's addictive. People love watching someone fight power. Now here's where Vince gets truly dangerous creatively. He wasn't afraid to blur the line. In fact, he loved it. He understood wrestling works best when it feels like you're seeing something you're not supposed to see, when the curtain shakes, when the audience starts asking, wait, is this real? That's why certain moments in WWE didn't just entertain fans, they changed the way fans watch the product. The Montreal Screwjob is the biggest example. Not because it was controversial, because it permanently made fans feel like the show could have real consequences. It turned wrestling into a reality show with scars. And Vince didn't run from the outrage. He weaponized it. He turned public hatred into storyline fuel. He turned the company into a character. He turned the idea of betrayal into a creative weapon. You see the same blur the line instinct in moments that made fans feel like the show could explode. That's why people talk about those eras like they were alive, because they felt unpredictable, they felt dangerous, they felt like the writers weren't fully in control even when they were. And once you understand that, you start noticing Vince's blueprint everywhere. If you break it down, Vince built WWE on a handful of repeatable creative tricks, and the easiest way to understand them is with wrestler examples you can picture instantly. Trick 1. Make it easy to understand. Even the biggest feuds could be explained in one sentence. Austin wants to destroy his boss. Undertaker wants souls and respect. Kane wants revenge. Triple H wants control. Orton wants to prove he's the coldest guy in the room. Rock vs. Austin is two alphas fighting over the crown. Cena vs. Edge is the perfect hero versus the perfect opportunist. Batista vs. Triple H is the student finally turning on the teacher. Simple does not mean shallow. Simple means powerful. Because if you miss 3 weeks, you can jump back in and still feel the heat. Trick 2. Make the audience part of the show. Vince didn't want fans watching quietly like it was a movie. He wanted fans participating like it was a riot. That's why chants became weapons. The yes chant, the what chant, the DX energy, the crowd splitting Cena promos in half, the Undertaker entrance forcing everybody to stand up. These aren't just reactions, they're rituals. And once wrestling becomes ritual, it becomes habit. Trick 3. Build moments, not just matches. Matches can be great, but moments become history. Mankind flying off the cell is a moment. Austin bleeding and refusing to quit is a moment. Rock and Hogan staring each other down is a moment. Edge cashing in the first Money in the Bank is a moment. Seth Rollins cashing in at WrestleMania is a moment. The streak ending is a moment. These are memory anchors. Vince always prioritized memory anchors because clips replay forever, and replay is how legends are built. Trick 4. Keep the audience slightly uncomfortable, not in a gross way, in a suspense way. Like at any moment, something could go off the rails. That's why early Brock felt terrifying. That's why Kane debuting felt like a real threat. That's why the Austin era felt chaotic. That's why even Batista turning on Triple H felt explosive, because it felt like the story was boiling over. Unpredictability creates urgency. Urgency creates live viewing. And live viewing creates heat. Now this is where Vince's genius and Vince's chaos are the same thing, because Vince believed the show was never finished. The script was never final. Everything could change, even on the day of the show. Creatively, that can produce magic. It can create those lightning in a bottle moments where the show feels alive. But that same chaos also creates whiplash. Pushes die randomly. Storylines get rewritten mid-sentence. Someone gets hot and then suddenly they're cooled off, like somebody got scared of it. And you've seen this pattern with so many wrestlers. RVD gets momentum and then it's like the company panics. Zack Ryder gets over, and it's like, wait, you weren't supposed to do that. Wade Barrett gets hot, and then stop-start. Mr. Kennedy looks like the next main event guy, and then the rug gets pulled. Nexus arrives like an invasion and then never fully gets the payoff it felt like it was built for. This is the downside of Vince's genius. He could create lightning, but he could also bottle it and throw it away. And we have to acknowledge the present reality around Vince too, because it's part of why this topic is complicated. Vince is a controversial figure, and there have been serious allegations connected to his name that he has denied. That means when people talk about Vince, it's never going to be clean. The legacy is argued because the man is argued. But if we're strictly talking about creative genius, here's the honest conclusion. Vince changed wrestling forever by turning it into weekly television. He built a system that manufactures moments. He created villains that feel real. He understood presentation as power. He turned stars into icons through simplicity, repetition, and ritual. And he built emotional engines that made millions of people feel like they had to watch the next episode. And the reason this matters right now is because WWE is in a new era. Different leadership, different philosophy, different pace. So the question isn't just, was Vince a genius? The real question is, what did WWE gain when it moved away from Vince's chaos? And what did it lose? Because love it or hate it, Vince's WWE felt alive. It felt like the show could explode. It felt like you couldn't miss it, because next week might become history. And when that feeling disappears, even great matches can start to feel like content instead of conflict. So if you want to understand modern WWE, you have to understand Vince's blueprint, because WWE is still living in the house he built. So if you want the purest version of Vince McMahon's WWE, click the video on screen right now, WWE's wildest moments in history. Because once you watch those moments back to back with this, you'll realize something. Vince wasn't booking matches. He was booking shock. He was booking emotion. And he was booking moments that still live forever.